I want to start with something small, something that on its own seems almost too mundane to mention: a piece of paper. A simple, bureaucratic document buried in the archives of 1894 America. It is a federal directive called Order 114, issued by the newly formed United States Board on Geographic Names. On its surface, it is just a list. But when you look closer, this document is the smoking gun of how our history was deliberately falsified. In a single administrative action, hundreds of American towns and cities were stripped of their original names overnight. Descriptive words, words like old, words like new, ridge, and valley, words that physically tied a location to its old world heritage, were simply erased. Out of the 323 recorded American city renames from that exact period, one state alone accounted for an impossible 157 of them: Illinois. 157 communities legally severed from their past in an instant. The official explanation: postal efficiency, bureaucratic modernization to smooth out mail routes. And maybe that is all you were supposed to think it is. But here is what I kept coming back to as I searched for the old world story. Before they erase a civilization from memory, they do not need to bulldoze every building. They do not need to immediately burn the records or hide the missing 1890 census. They do not even need to cover up the underground cities or the remnants of an ancient hydraulic power grid right away. You just need to change what a place is called. If you do it fast enough, completely enough, and simultaneously enough within a generation or two, nobody remembers what was there before. That is exactly what happened. Not gradually, not organically over centuries. I am talking about single days, single decrees. Why was this erased? Why did this secret need to be hidden behind a mundane postal decree? The deeper I went into this hidden truth, the more I realized this was not an isolated event in America. This was a coordinated wave, and it did not start in the 1890s. Let me take you across the Atlantic. Let me take you to France. The year is 1793, and a revolution is consuming everything in its path. Not just kings and aristocrats, but the very names of reality. Streets are being renamed, saints are being expunged from the record, and the calendar itself is abolished and rebuilt completely from year zero. This, mainstream history tells us, is the official explanation. The Jacobins were systematically erasing the old world, desperately trying to make France new, rational, clean. I accept that framing, at least as a partial answer. But here is where the official explanation begins to strain under its own weight, and where the hidden system reveals itself. On the 12th of October, 1793, and later enforced throughout 1794, the Committee of Public Safety issued severe decrees. They were renaming major cities that had committed what they called Federalist crimes. The original documents tell us that the city of Lyon had resisted Paris. The city of Toulon had invited in the British. The city of Marles had rebelled. And so, the punishment was linguistic erasure. Marseilles became Varnum, the city without a name. Stop and pause on that for a second. This was not metaphorical. A city of hundreds of thousands of people, one of the oldest, most continuously inhabited urban centers in the Western world, deliberately and officially rendered nameless by a piece of paper. Why? The revolutionary answer is punishment, political humiliation. And yes, the politics are real, the grievances are documented. I am not dismissing them. But the deeper I looked into this missing history, the stranger and more impossible it got. Because the renaming did not stop with the politically rebellious cities like Lyon, Bordeaux, and Marles. It spread like a virus. It became a systematic, bureaucratic machine. It hit cities that had not rebelled. It hit small towns, remote villages, places with absolutely no federalist crime to their name. They were renamed too, reformed, reclassified. The pattern repeats with an unsettling, almost mechanical precision. And then I started referencing the dates, not just the broad revolutionary period, but the specific, granular decree dates. And what emerged from the archives was not a chaotic, organic process of political punishment rolling out slowly across months. What emerged were distinct clusters, single days where multiple cities, in completely different regions, with completely different political histories, were administratively renamed simultaneously. This raises a simple but entirely critical question, one that shatters the accepted illusion. What logistical mechanism existed in 1793 to pull this off? We are talking about a time without telegraphs, a time without railways, a time without anything even remotely resembling modern communication infrastructure. The French government in 1793 is essentially a committee of men meeting in Paris in the middle of a brutal civil war, in a massive country, sending dispatches by horse. What mechanism was capable of coordinating mass renaming events across an entire country, sometimes in apparent synchrony? The silence on that question in the standard histories is absolutely deafening. Efficient systems do not just spontaneously coordinate at a national scale without a pre-existing infrastructure. It requires a level of control that mainstream history denies existed back then. But the true scale of this secret becomes terrifying when you realize that this exact same mechanism of erasure was not isolated to the French Revolution. To understand the sheer magnitude of what was hidden, we have to leave the blood-soaked streets of Paris and cross back over the Atlantic. We have to jump exactly a century forward, back to America. Back to 1894 and the massive, unexplainable anomalies waiting in the American Midwest. Let us return to America, to 1894, and to that impossible anomaly I mentioned at the start. Remember the number: 157 renames in the state of Illinois alone. I have spent a lot of time with this number. I have tried to make it make sense in purely logistical terms, even granting the postal argument fully, even saying yes, mail route duplication was a genuine problem. Why does Illinois account for nearly half of all recorded renames under Order 114? Was the postal infrastructure there uniquely chaotic? The deeper I went, the more Illinois started to feel less like an administrative outlier and more like a focal point of erasure. The Illinois River Valley and the Upper Mississippi Corridor is precisely the region where 19th century researchers, engineers, and settlers kept stumbling across things they could not explain. They found earthworks of impossible scale, canal systems of unexpected sophistication, road alignments that did not match any known indigenous engineering tradition and did not match any documented European colonial project either. They found places with old names, names that pointed backwards towards something prior. And then, in 1894, those names were systematically wiped out. When you look at the specific words removed, words like old, valley, and ridge, you see a topographic memory being scrubbed clean. When old Shawneetown becomes just Shawneetown, the linguistic connection between a location and its own physical history is severed. The question of what old was referring to stops being part of the daily vocabulary. A generation later, nobody asks. That is how you erase a civilization without burning it. But this fits perfectly into a much larger timeline of suppression. This is the exact same era as the deliberately missing 1890 census, where millions of genealogical records were conveniently lost to fire, severing families from their old world heritage. It is the era following 1855, when they physically razed the entire city of Chicago out of the mud, and 1863, when a new, centralized financial system was imposed on a nation where previously America had no banks as we know them today. By 1900, Smithsonian artifacts that challenged the mainstream timeline, including skeletal anomalies like giant children and the whispered documented accounts of the last living giants found in those very Midwest earthworks, were being quietly locked away. But nothing exposes this deliberate falsification quite like a city that named itself. Let me take you to Phoenix, Arizona. The name was chosen in 1867 by Darrell Duper, a British settler with a classical education. Duper looked at the landscape around him, at the remnants beneath his feet, and he said explicitly, "This place should be named after the mythological bird that rises from the ashes, because this is a civilization rising from the ruins of a prior one." That is not a fringe theory. That is the documented, first-person, contemporaneous explanation given by the man who named the city. He saw ruins. When Anglo-American settlers arrived in the Salt River Valley in the 1860s and 1870s, they found an advanced hydraulic power grid and canal system already in place, not partially constructed. In place, hundreds of miles of engineered waterways aligned to the landscape, capable of massive agricultural irrigation. The settlers did not build these canals. They simply cleaned them out, reinforced them, and started running water through a system someone else had engineered. The mainstream academic answer blames the Hoham people, a pre-Columbian civilization they claim mysteriously disappeared around the 15th century. But here is the question you must ask. How do you build hundreds of miles of functionally integrated irrigation canals in a desert, at a scale a 19th century American city would use for decades, without leaving behind the massive industrial infrastructure that should accompany it? Where are their underground cities? If a prior civilization built something so sophisticated that the next civilization simply arrived and turned on the water, What does that suggest about what came before? Now, I need to talk about something that appears on maps, and then, with remarkable and terrifying speed, stops appearing on maps. Tartaria. If you go back to European cartography of the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries, you find something that contemporary world maps simply do not show. You find a vast territorial designation, sometimes called Grand Tartary, sometimes Tartaria Magna, covering an enormous swath of northern and central Asia. The maps further divide this massive realm into sub-design nations: Russian Tartary, Chinese Tartary, and independent Tartary. These are not fringe notations drawn by amateur explorers. These designations appear on maps produced by the most respected cartographers of the era. They are documented on maps from Bloch, from Ortelius, from Marta, from the French royal cartographic tradition, and from official British admiral surveys. These are not obscure sources. These are the foundational documents of Western geographic knowledge. And then, across the late 18th and early 19th centuries, roughly the exact same period we have been examining, the exact same window of revolutionary upheaval in France, administrative reorganization in America, and mass renaming globally, Tartaria begins to shrink. Then it contracts, then it fragments, then it disappears. By the mid-19th century, it is completely gone. The designation has been absorbed into Russia, into China, and into Central Asian administrative units with brand new names. The official explanation is that Tartaria was never a political entity, just a geographic placeholder, a European catch, all term for territories that were not well understood, and that as knowledge improved, the term was retired. That is a coherent explanation. But here is what that explanation utterly fails to account for: the speed of the disappearance and the coordination of it. This is not one country revising its maps. This is a pan-European, multi-imperial, multi-cartographic tradition, all converging across roughly the exact same decades on the exact same decision: Tartaria goes away. At the same time that cities in France are being rendered nameless. At the same time that American place names, containing words like old, are being stripped. At the same time that Phoenix is being built on top of canals, no one can fully explain. And that brings us to the final anomaly, a layer I have been circling this entire time, which deserves to be named directly. Across the mid to late 19th century, in cities across Europe, Russia, and America, there is an explosion of architectural construction that mainstream historians describe as a golden age of civic building. Suddenly, there are massive neoclassical government buildings, grand train stations, sprawling exhibition halls, and ornate World's Fair pavilions. But here is the physical paradox. These ornate municipal structures were suddenly appearing in cities that, according to their own official records, had been rough frontier settlements just decades before. The standard history says industrial wealth and skilled immigrant labor made this possible. But here is the question that the old world architecture itself keeps quietly asking: where are the intermediate stages? When you look at a city that goes from dirt roads and wooden frontier settlements to possessing world-class neoclassical architecture in the span of 20 or 30 years, without commensurate documentation of construction timelines, labor forces, material sourcing, or architectural education infrastructure, the official explanation begins to require a great deal of blind faith. When you layer that architectural anomaly over the renaming pattern, cities rename just as they are being rebuilt, just as new civic identities are being installed, just as the cartographic record of Tartaria is being wiped clean, a chilling question emerges. What were these buildings before they became what we call them now? What was inherited, restoried, and officially retired? I started this investigation looking for something small, a footnote, a piece of data that did not fit cleanly into the official timeline. What I found instead was a window that opens onto roughly 100 years of history, from roughly 1750 to 1900, during which the names of the physical world were substantially reorganized, and the maps of the reality we know were systematically redrawn. I am not telling you what this means. I genuinely do not know, but I am asking you to consider the possibility that the official explanations we have been given simply do not go far enough, because the coordination problem does not go away. The impossible Illinois number does not go away. The cartographic erasure of Tartaria does not go away. The ancient canal system beneath the desert does not go away. The question is no longer whether the past was erased. The evidence suggests something much larger than a simple denial can account for. The question is not when it happened, We have the specific dates. It is not where. The geography is world-spanning. No. The question that keeps me awake, the one that brought you here, is why? Why did places stop being called what they were? All at once, on the same days, in completely different countries. As if something massive, something prior, an old world that had maps and canals and grand architecture was being administratively concluded, renamed, and buried just shallow enough that someone might eventually notice the pattern. If they could erase an entire civilization in a single generation just by changing its name and hiding the paperwork, what physical remnants of that erased world are you walking past every single day, completely unaware of what it truly is? Tell me what you think in the comments below.